guys, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm very excited to bring you my peak week strategies and all the reasoning behind the decisions I make. So I think this will be very beneficial for a lot of you guys, especially if you haven't competed before, or if you are competing this season, or if you've had fairly unsuccessful peak weeks in the past. But without further ado, let's get stuck into some of this info. So I've got some notes here on the screen, so I make sure that I cover all the important points. And first up is when I'll be competing. So I'm about a week out at the moment. I'll be competing on 2 days actually, which is different from what I've done in the past. So I'll be competing on a Saturday and a Sunday. And to get into a bit more depth about my actual personal approach, I'll be doing something called a backload. So there are typically 3 different types of ways of addressing a peak week: a front load, a mid load, and a backload. A backload is basically where you structure the majority of your carbohydrates towards the end, so closer to the show days themselves. And then a front load is the opposite, more towards the start of the week, and then you try and retain that fullness. And then a mid load is somewhere in between, where you basically don't go to either end of the extreme. So because I've been doing high days this whole prep, basically I've been doing 3 high days per week at around 500 grams of carbs each of those days, and then I've been doing 4 low days. So that gives me the perfect opportunity to do a successful backload, because I know how I'm going to respond to those carbs. They fill me out nicely. I'm used to the food choices I've been eating on those high days, so it's going to work really well basically. So fingers crossed at least. But I think one important thing to address with a peak week is that it's not magical. It's not going to suddenly make you turn into a bodybuilder if you don't have enough muscle. It's not going to suddenly make you shredded. It's basically kind of enforcing what you've already done. So if you already look great, then you just might look maybe 1 to 5% better in peak week. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of misconceptions about people suddenly looking 1,000 times better in peak week, which unfortunately is just not going to happen. And what I will say about peak week is that you can't do a lot to look drastically better, but you can do some stuff that will make you look worse. And like a prime example of that is cutting out water and sodium in like 1 to 2 days prior to the show. As a natural competitor, that's a very good way of making you look worse. So my main goal for the peak week is basically to fill out, and throughout this video, we'll get stuck into some more depth now, but I'll be addressing my nutrition, my training, and the show day itself. So let's start with nutrition. I think this is definitely where a lot of confusion arises around sodium and water, and should you carb up, should you, I don't know, not carb up. Like I'll be giving you my reasoning behind everything and what I'll be doing myself. So since my shows are on Saturday and Sunday, basically Monday to Wednesday, I'll be running my typical low carbohydrate days or lower calorie days. And that'll be around 200 to 250 grams of carbs, 50 grams of fat, and 250 protein. So the benefit of a backload is that I might get a little bit leaner on those days. Like that's not a priority for me, but it just comes as a side effect, I guess, of running a backload. And then Thursday to Sunday is basically when the magic happens, so to speak. I'll be running my usual high days. This time I'll be doing 4 just because I'm competing Saturday and Sunday. And so I'll be doing 500 carb, around 200 to 225 protein, and around 50 grams of fat as well. So I know that 500 gram carb amount, or maybe slightly more depending on how things go, I know that's going to fill me out very nicely. And just the way I handle carbohydrates, there's very little risk of me spilling over, because I'm naturally quite an active person and I handle carbohydrates very well. So that brings me on to a few other points. So probably the more controversial points of like sodium and water and other food choices as well. So basically in terms of sodium, a lot of people make the mistake of cutting that out or playing around with it too much. Again, if you look good and like the choices that you've been making result you in looking good, don't try and change things. Don't suddenly mix up all these variables, which might just make you look worse. So in terms of sodium, the reason why it's important is it has a role in basically carbohydrate storage, and of course there's an acute response to sodium intake, which will raise blood pressure. And that's the reason why we get like a good pump from sodium. That's why we should always try and have it before training, and of course prior to the stage, and I'll get to that in a second. So in terms of sodium, I would basically be keeping it the same throughout the week, so salting my meals as I usually would, and that's about it really. So nothing too exciting when it comes to sodium. So in terms of water, again, the one thing I want to enforce is do not cut your water. Like, it's just not a good idea, because your muscles are like around 70% comprised of water. So if you cut water, you're gonna look really flat. And the other point of water is again used for carbohydrate storage. When we store carbohydrates as glycogen, which is our fuel storage of carbohydrates, that uses around 2 to 4 grams of water, or mils of water per gram of glycogen. So if you don't have enough water and you're trying to store glycogen, then you're not going to look very good basically. So those are two really important points. And in terms of water, again, I'll be drinking as per usual. I might drink even a little bit more on the higher carbohydrate days, because naturally I'll be requiring more water to store those carbohydrates as glycogen. So I hope that all makes sense. If at any time throughout this, if you have any questions, just put them in the comments, and of course I'll respond to every one of them. So the other points of nutrition throughout the week is it's really not the time to experiment. So it might be tempting to have like some cereals that you might not usually have, or some spreads or some lollies. But if you haven't tried them before throughout your other higher carbohydrate days or refeeds, I would encourage you to keep your food choices the same, because you just don't know how you're going to respond. So I'll be keeping all my food choices the same. The only thing that I will be doing is tapering down my fiber intake, because we just want to reduce any sort of gastrointestinal distress, or reduce any, I guess, food babies, so to speak. So like, for example, I won't be having my huge dinner of vegetables in the evening, because that's just going to make my stomach very full. And that'll be some considerations for show day as well. So to kind of wrap up nutrition, keeping it very similar. Like, sodium's going to stay the same, water's going to stay the same. I'm just going to run my usual high days in a backload fashion, and then have my low days, and just be conscious of my fiber intake and food volume on those high carbohydrate days. So adjusting my meals accordingly. So let's move on to training. Okay, so training. Again, I want to reiterate that with training, just as like nutrition, the hard work is done. So if you're training balls to the wall, a huge leg day, the day before your show, there's just no need for that. Like, it's just going to increase inflammation. It's going to make you feel fatigued. And training is still probably not as important as nutrition for peak week, but it certainly does carry its benefits, and you can muck it up, especially for like the bodybuilding category, where you use your legs a lot to pose. So I'll be training as per usual on Monday and Tuesday. Also, I'll just do my normal sessions for the Saturday and Sunday shows. So on Monday, I'll probably train upper, and Tuesday I'll train lower body. And that brings me on to the next point of lower body. So because in bodybuilding and classic physique, I'll be using my legs a lot, and I want to basically show them as lean and as shredded as possible, with all the striations and veins and all that kind of stuff. I want to ensure that they're not holding any water due to inflammation. So that way I try to have the last leg session about like 5 to 10 days before the stage. So what I might even do is train legs on the Monday and just do upper body on the Tuesday. That might also work well too. So then I'll just be resting Wednesday as per usual, and then from Thursday my training will change slightly, just like when I basically start the higher carbohydrate days. So on Thursday I'll just be doing a light, low intensity, full body pump session. For the legs, I'll just be doing literally leg extension, leg curl, low intensity, just getting some blood flow. That'll potentially help with some glucose uptake, so storing the carbohydrates. And Friday will just be basically an upper body pump session. So again, low intensity, just getting some blood flow, feeling good, and so on and so forth. So alongside that, personally, I'm not doing any cardio, I'm just doing daily steps, but I would say throughout peak week, you would probably taper down the cardio quite a bit and probably no cardio from when your high days start. Personally, I'll probably, when the high days start, I'll just be tapering down my steps from around 14K down to 10K each day, which should be very manageable. And again, that's just to promote a low stress environment, reduce any inflammation in the lower body, and basically feel good. So yeah, again, pretty simple stuff when it comes to training. Again, the hard work is done, so there's no need to go crazy. Like, you're not going to make any huge changes by training incredibly hard in peak week. If anything, you might just look worse due to the extra stress and the extra inflammation. And we know that inflammation comes with water retention. So if you have any questions about training, leave them below and we'll move on to the show day itself. So show day, the big finale, the day you want to look the best and feel the best as well. So it's important to note that on show day, little can be changed. So you're basically maintaining a look. So if you come into show day super flat because you haven't had enough carbohydrates or you haven't had enough water and sodium, then unfortunately there's only so much you can do, because as a natural competitor, these changes take time. For example, storing carbohydrates as glycogen can take as long as 24 hours or potentially even longer than that. So if you're stuffing your face with lollies trying to fill out more, like, it's only going to happen at a certain pace. You can't rush that really. So on show day, I'll basically be maintaining the look I've already established throughout Thursday and Friday by having more carbohydrates. So again, carbohydrates will be fairly high, mainly for energy, because again, I'm not going to gain much more fullness on the show day. Low to moderate fat and protein, and low food volume. Of course, we don't want to have like a distended belly or anything like that. And in terms of sodium and water, I'll be drinking to thirst or drinking pretty much my usual amount of water. And the key there is just, again, not overindulging in water, because you don't want to distend that stomach. Because we're going, at the end of the day, it's an aesthetic sport, so we're trying to promote the look as much as possible. So in terms of salt or sodium, I'll basically be having a dose of that prior to my pump up, and that is usually around a teaspoon of salt with some caffeine, and that will basically acutely increase blood pressure, helps you get a pump, all that kind of stuff as well. So again, show day nutrition and show day training, I guess if you could call it, is very simple. You basically want to maintain the look you have already created. So it's hopefully a very stress-free day in terms of making those decisions. The final point that I will mention is the pumping up. So you don't want to screw up the pumping up. You want to make sure that you have enough time to time it well. So you don't want to start too early, because then you'll flatten out. You don't want to be rushed, because then you won't get in a good pump up. So I usually start around 15 to 20 minutes prior to when I know I'm getting on stage, pump up all my muscle groups. I do not pump up my legs. Again, I repeat, do not pump up your legs if you're a bodybuilder or classic physique, because that's just you're gonna store more fluid and blood in there, and you're gonna basically not be able to see all the cuts that you wanna see. So yeah, I'll just be pumping up my upper body, and that'll really help me keep warm, because one thing we know about comp prep is you get cold very quickly and very easily, especially if it's an air-conditioned backstage, which one of the venues will be. So I'll be making sure I pump up vigorously. I've got this little hot stuff, which is basically like deep heat, which will help me get a sweat on and stuff like that. Again, you don't want to sweat too much though. There's a few considerations to take, but we might even be bringing something like a hairdryer to the show day just to stay warm. Because like once you've got that top coat of tan on, you can't really chuck on a jumper or anything. So that pretty much wraps up this video. I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this peak week goes, and of course doing a review day on my peak week, a review video I should say on my peak week and how the shows go. But I'm very confident in this approach, and I'm very much looking forward to not only this peak week but the peak weeks to come, and seeing if I can refine anything. So without further ado, I'll wrap this video up. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe, let me know any further video suggestions that you have, and we will see you in the videos to come. Cheers.